Coming up on CTV News tonight, more aftershocks and the inquest into the collapsed CTV building is put on hold. Welcome to CTV News, I'm Canetta Knight. As we all know, Christchurch has been rocked by a number of huge aftershocks. The first quake measured 5.7 on the Richter scale and hit at 1 p.m. on Monday, and the second, more violent shake measured 6.3 and hit at 2:20 p.m. Both quakes have been recently upgraded. They were both followed by a series of small aftershocks and felt as far south as Dunedin. Malls, shops and offices were evacuated and Littleton Tunnel was closed. And flooding and liquefaction has once again engulfed the long-suffering eastern suburbs. Fulton Hogan and City Care are removing silt. Those who can clear their silt should leave it on the road for pickup. And the Volunteer Student Army is back in action with Sam Johnson organising cleanups. Here's Emily Cooper with the latest information from Mayor Bob Parker and other emergency services.
Christchurch Mayor Bob Parker acknowledged the large amount of work that went on in the city overnight. This included staff who were fixing roads and bridges, and by first light all bridges had been rechecked. Bridge Street in New Brighton is now open but closed to heavy vehicles. Engineers are now checking through buildings, with a further 50 buildings in the CBD damaged. Most buildings that have moved are buildings that were going to be demolished anyway, and Mayor Parker believes this could make the decision to pull down buildings easier for building owners. The cathedral was one of the buildings that took a major hit.
It's taken another really heavy hit. One of the walls has been compromised. I think I was told it was the western wall, but certainly the big rose window, which is the symbol of the cathedral, very often has collapsed into the building. That's a tragedy, and we're all very sad to hear that. But, you know, we didn't lose a life yesterday, and I think we've got to look on the bright side. We didn't lose any lives. You can fix buildings, you can't fix people, and it's the people that our focus is on today.
He says the building cannot be reconstructed, and this will be the same for a number of heritage buildings. He says the cathedral will be rebuilt, but we can't have buildings that will compromise the safety of citizens, no matter how iconic the building may be. This is the same for Littleton's Timeball station. The building, which was being carefully deconstructed, has been completely destroyed.
And there was a lot of work going on to retain parts of that. Well, that's gone.
Oh, we'll get a picture in the paper.
There's the potential for bugs to get into the system. We do have chlorination stations in place, but boil the water. And just a reminder, that means even when you're cleaning your teeth, please. Remember what's happened in Europe in the last week or so with an outbreak there of, I think it was some kind of E. coli thing. We don't want any gastroenteritis or problems like that in the city. If you boil your water, that won't happen.
Water is back on to 90% of flat areas, and more will be back on by the end of tomorrow. There was some concern overnight with high tide levels, but there are no reports of flooding. And for those familiar with chemical toilets, they may need to be used again.
It's happy time again, so the chemical loo's got to come out and use those. That will help us. Also, if you've still got a portaloo in the area, then you know what to do.
Mayor Parker reiterated people should stay out of red sticker homes.
The geotech guys were right when they said we could expect something around 5 to 6 on the Richter scale. That was duly delivered to us yesterday. What they are now saying is that there is a likelihood of an aftershock in the area of maybe a 5 on the Richter scale. Now that gives me a great deal of concern for people around those hillside areas. You mustn't go into a red stickered house.
Police had positive feedback from what occurred in the city overnight and say there was no reported damage from the 4.7 quake that struck in the early hours of the morning.
People have generally stayed off the road, which has been really positive, and avoiding sightseeing is the other message. And with the school shut, again, the same request: if you can stay off the roads. The council workers, Orion, Telecom are all out there trying to repair the infrastructure, and the easier the flow, the easier it is for all of us to get that power back on. We're maintaining the CBD cordon at this stage. There was quite a bit of damage in there, which was talked about last night. So again, we're not having anyone in there, but there'll be an assessment to see who can get in there safely and what needs to be done in that area.
Superintendent Cliff says police were assisted by the Army, providing 30 patrols in the eastern suburbs. But he says it was a very quiet night.
We still have the 140 additional police in the city that we've had since the February earthquake, and they're clearly remaining. So we've got plenty of capacity if people have any problems.
Dan Coward from the New Zealand Fire Service says they've had all available crews on duty.
If they feel unsafe, if they believe there is a risk within their home, their building, they're right to react and use 111 and call for the fire service. We will respond and we will undertake a home fire safety check. We'll ensure that where there is a life risk or risk to your infrastructure, we'll undertake remedial work where we can.
St John Ambulance has requested extra staff to support local staff, and Cal Stadium Welfare Centre has an ambulance at their location. Schools remain closed today, as well as libraries, surface centres and recreational sports centres, checking council buildings such as libraries. Orion Power also had positive news.
A little less than 15,000 still to go. Most of the damage is in the Sumner Redcliffs area, which is unsurprising. We have crews now surveying the area. We have yet to find significant damage to our network in terms of substations, so that's good news. The Dallington area came on within hours yesterday, and mainly due to the temporary 66,000 volt line that we put through there, and we really appreciate the support from the neighbours for those lines, because that's really made the difference to keep the supply on in that area.
And they have a strong message to people to keep warm, particularly the elderly, with a number of people taken to hospital last night for hypothermia.
And here's an update from Prime Minister John Key.
Secondly, just in terms of the work we've now done with Tonkin and Taylor, the engineers have essentially confirmed that the earthquake that took place yesterday, or the two earthquakes, are very much a replica of the earthquake that took place on the 27th of February. In other words, its footprint has been largely the same, its intensity has been very strong. Certain areas it was pulling 2 Gs both horizontally and 1 G vertically, so it's a large earthquake. It has sustained further damage to land, but again very much in the areas that were badly damaged on February the 22nd. We now have a reasonably clear picture about what land won't be able to be rebuilt on and what land will be able to be fixed up. But the process we need to continue to go through and what we've been working on for quite some time is the process of negotiation with EQC and with the insurers and their reinsurers. And obviously it's extremely important that we get it right in terms of making sure that there's clarity and confidence that people can take from the process, both those that will be asked to ultimately have to abandon their land and those that will be given the option of being able to be rebuilt. So it's an important process that we take step by step. But the engineers are confident that they've got a good picture of that. There has been further subsidence overnight in certain areas, up to 200 to 300 millimetres that the land has moved, but they are, as I say, fairly much confident it's very much a replica from the last year.
Prime Minister, can you give us any more details as to what that picture is?
In terms of the picture of
the areas that will be rebuilt on and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we don't have perfect information on that at this point. Well, we do have good information. Our issue is we want to be in a position to be able to communicate with homeowners and give them some clarity, not only about the position as it relates to their land, but also actually in terms of what happens next. And I think that'll be the big question that homeowners have once they understand whether their house can be rebuilt and whether their section can be reoccupied again. The next issue is what is the process from here, what financial payments would be made, and when would they be paid and what would be their options. So at this point, that is the process of negotiation that's really going on, as opposed to trying to identify exactly the areas that can no longer be built on.
And is there any answer yet as to who would foot the bill if land cannot be rebuilt upon?
Well, they're all the sort of negotiations that we're going through. I mean, one of the interesting things here is that New Zealand has such a high level of insurance and reinsurance, and so it's so well protected for this kind of event that it adds a high degree of security for homeowners, but it also adds a degree of complexity to the picture. Because we are having to negotiate often with dozens and dozens of reinsurers via those insurance companies, and they all have individual contracts. What we're trying to do is make sure that by the time we go to homeowners that there's clarity and as much as we possibly can simplicity when it comes to the process. So we understand the anxiety and we're asking homeowners to be patient with us. I think it's worth doing the job and doing it absolutely properly. If we don't, then people can't take confidence from the process and we can't afford to have that situation.
Coming up after the break, we look at the inquest into the CTV building. Roger Sutton took up his position as Chief Executive of Sarah yesterday, a day which proved a challenge for all of us. Mr Sutton will be in the position for a 5-year term. He has been described as a strong leader and has been praised as the best man for the job, but he told CTV News he acknowledges that there is a huge job ahead of us.
Oh, the job is so big. Sometimes I go to sleep and I just think, I just can't believe the city is ever going to tackle this. But at the end of the day, there's already a lot of people in this town working really hard at making it really work. So I'm really confident we're going to get there. And we have to take the people with us. We have to communicate to people about how long it's going to be, what our milestones are going to be, and where we are just in our decision making.
Mr Sutton has just returned from an overseas holiday with his wife Jo and their 3 boys. In more quake-related news, the inquest into the deaths of those who died when the CTV building collapsed during the earthquake on the 22nd of February began yesterday. However, the inquest was put on hold when yesterday's quakes hit and has now been postponed until further notice. Emily Cooper has more.
Yesterday's inquest was put on hold due to the afternoon's earthquakes. However, some questions family members had about the deaths of their loved ones were still able to be answered. The family members whose loved ones the half-day-long inquest was able to cover said they were anxious to know about the deaths of their loved ones, particularly the design of the building, any work carried out on the building, and why the building was deemed safe. However, Coroner Gordon Martinga says this process is still evolving.
Because of the issues which have been raised as being matters of interest, such as, of course, why the building collapsed, the issue of why was it deemed safe, that is a matter which is being considered by the Royal Commission directly, and it's appropriate for there to be no double-up of investigation or inquiry.
Today's inquest was due to focus on the deaths of CTV staff members. Yesterday's inquest was similar to the inquest into the deaths of the final unidentified 9 victims of the quake. Detective Inspector Paul Kench started with the same opening as the previous inquest by giving a background brief about the day of the 22nd of February and praising the heroic actions of emergency staff. He then gave an overview of the DVI process and how the bodies were identified. The majority of the victims were reported missing to police soon after the quake. After the bodies were recovered, they were transported to a temporary morgue or to the morgue at Burnham Military Camp and were given a unique DVI number. After Inspector Kench's statement, families were able to ask questions. Quake victim Dominic Bell's sister wanted his death to be stated as caused by the collapse of the CTV building as well as the earthquake. The family's lawyer, Marcus Elliott, then asked Kench some questions about the process the police went through on the day of the quake.
They were actually pulling out people relatively quickly, one after the other. So it's not as if they were actually taking a breath, recording things as we would meticulously do in a scene examination. The focus was on actually getting people out of that building as quickly as they could, also considering their own safety as they went about that business.
Family members have formed a group and now have legal representation.
The group is a group of families whose loved ones died in the CTV building following the earthquake in the clinic, King's Education and CTV sections of the building. So that the families are obviously anxious to know as much as possible about the circumstances surrounding the deaths of their loved ones. That's both for their own peace of mind and in the hope that such information can be used to ensure that such a tragedy doesn't happen again. In particular, they'd like to know about the design and construction of the CTV building, as well as the nature and effectiveness of any assessment of it and of any remedial work carried out on it after the 4 September earthquake and the 26 December 2010 aftershock. At this stage, they have very little information about the circumstances of the deaths of their loved ones. The families are obviously very anxious to know how and why their loved ones died in the CTV building. They want to assist the coroner and the Royal Commissioners where they can and to have a voice in the inquiries which are taking place.
Mr Elliott says a request is being made for government funding for legal representation for the families.
In other news, frustration is growing with travellers as Jetstar, Qantas and Pacific Blue cancelled domestic and international flights across New Zealand and Australia, which left thousands stranded. The trouble is caused by an ash cloud coming from a Chile volcano. Air New Zealand is still flying, but the company has warned this may change. And I spoke to Jim Anderton on City Life yesterday, and he had some interesting ideas about Christchurch.
No, I wanted to make a contribution to the city, and I'm doing that in my own way now. So, you know, people make their decisions about who they want to do things, and they did, and, you know, you live with the result.
Do you think it was a good dress rehearsal, I suppose, the September one for now Mayor Bob Parker for February?
Well, you know, it's hard for someone who's been a contestant and, in this case, been defeated, to make comment that would appear balanced to anybody, because if I make a criticism, they'd say, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? And if I don't say anything, it's like, oh, he's a wimp. I don't think the council has learned as much as I would have hoped, actually, to be honest. I mean, we're still having secret meetings about this, that and the other thing, and I don't think the council has got its head around the kind of issues that they need to. It's an amazing thing that the most expensive and most recent building in Christchurch, which happens to be the council offices, is still not open, and no one can say when it will be open. But all we know is that there's only superficial damage. Yeah, I think I could see a TUI billboard here. The council offices have been closed more than they've been open since the first earthquake, but there's only superficial damage. Yeah, right.
What about how we found out that there was going to be another big earthquake? Well, there was a 23% chance there would be another big earthquake because of a blog written by Sue Wells.
Yeah. Well, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And I think the way... I don't blame Sue Wells for putting out reports, but you've got to make sure that you put emphasis on how it's to be interpreted. Here's the first thing. If you say there's a 23% chance of an earthquake of, you know, between 6 or 7, the other way of putting that headline is there's a 77% chance that there won't be. Good news is not news, actually, unfortunately, for most media, with the exception of CTV, of course. Then you say, well, what does this 23% mean? 23%, it turns out, is the chance of a 6 to 7 earthquake in the whole of the Canterbury region. That's right up to the foothills of the Southern Alps. If you ask this question, what is the chance of an earthquake in Christchurch of that proportion, you find it's about a quarter of that. So the answer then is, what is the chance of a 6 to 7 earthquake in Christchurch in the next year? 6%. And the other way of putting it is, there's a 94% chance that there won't be.
Coming up after the break, your local weather, and we look at the Christchurch Arts Centre. Welcome back. All but one of the buildings in Christchurch's Arts Centre are red stickered. The bill for repairs is thought to be around $100 million and could take 15 years to rebuild. Corey Charlton spoke to a tenant of the Arts Centre about what the next step is.
Arts Centre tenants are trying to reverse the decision to terminate their leases with legal representation. 7 businesses have combined to file proceedings before the High Court in an attempt to see their lease suspended rather than terminated. One of them is Annie Edmonds of Annie's Wine Bar and Restaurant. She says at this stage she's unsure of the future of her business.
At the moment we're in limbo. We're living in hope at the moment. There might be other avenues we can explore, but then we get insurance issues and future insurance issues and all that sort of thing. There's a lot of dust needs to settle before we can head in a positive direction.
She also says the public support she's received has been amazing.
People stop me in the street and say, we really miss Annie's. When are you going to open? So the public would very much like Annie's to be open again. Not only here in Christchurch, but throughout New Zealand, and we've got many international fans as well. So public wants us.
The 15-year rebuilding timeframes recently mentioned, their lawyer Andrew McKenzie disagrees with.
There has been talk in the media for up to 15 years. We think that's far too long. Obviously, the buildings need to be safe before people can return, but we are in the process of getting some reports for the tenants to see how long that would be.
Annie's Wine Bar and Restaurant recently underwent earthquake strengthening.
What we're doing is the tenants have asked for the High Court to review the decision to terminate their tenancies. They don't believe that the tenancies have been terminated properly. They don't believe that there are grounds for termination, and they've asked the High Court to consider that.
He says his clients want the option to return to their premises once the buildings are safe.
I understand from Annie that the damage wasn't significant to her premises because her premises had been earthquake strengthened some years previously. Again, some places are obviously quite damaged and other places are less so. We object to the Arts Centre's rule that essentially everything has to be fixed until anything can open, and we don't think that's the way to proceed. The obstacle is that their tenancies have been terminated, which unless we can persuade the Arts Centre or persuade the court to overturn that, then there is no tenancies for them to return to.
The case is due to go before a judge on July 18.
That's CTV News. I'm Canetta Knight.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.